Welcome to the panel, which is a committee on communication. Just tell us about yourself in 5 minutes, and then after that, members will ask questions. But you are welcome to the panel. Thank you very much.
My name is Rachel Kalidass. I'm a chartered accountant by profession. I started my career quite early at the age of 17, whereby I did my articles as well as my studies part-time. I was therefore able to progress in my career quite fast. So that's how I think one is able to reconcile my age with my career experience. My passion is in public sector financial management and governance. I currently manage my own practice, our Kalidass and Associates. We focus on internal audit, risk management, operation, clean audit, turnaround plans. I also chair a number of audit committees. I've served on public sector boards over the years as well. I'm one of the former SABC board members that was unlawfully removed using the Companies Act previously.
Thank you very much, members. There is Ms. Kalidass, ready for you. Honorable Madisha, are you ready?
Thank you, Ms. Kalidass, and good morning. As you point out, you served on the previous SABC board and were, as you put it, irregularly removed from the board, okay? Why, in your opinion, were you removed from the board? I'm saying in your opinion, okay? And secondly, when matters started going wrong under the watch of the previous board as a whole, what did you do within the board to remedy the situation? And lastly, Chairperson, when it became apparent, I hope I'm not fast, when it became apparent that the board as a collective could not or did not want to take remedial action, what did you do to alert stakeholders, including society, of the impending implosion of the SABC? When did you blow the whistle? Could you have been more proactive? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Honourable Member. In terms of my removal, I think the process started in the organization to remove us when the former minister assumed office. Unfortunately, there were very difficult decisions that needed to be made from the time of the Public Protector report being issued. We, as a board at that point in time, there was disagreements in the manner in which those recommendations should be implemented, I think, and that actually resulted in the board fracturing into two components. One group which really wanted lawfulness to preside, which wanted the PP report to be implemented, and another group which did not want to. So I think there were a number of key decisions. That was one of them. The other one was the appointment of the former COO, Hlaudi Motseneng, whereby there was a large component of the board that supported his appointment, as well as myself and others who did not support that appointment. So I think it built up over time, but those were two very strategic decisions that were made by the previous board that saw us become out of favor with the number of board members as well as the minister in office at that time. And I think, myself specifically, I was dissenting continuously on those decisions. I made sure that they were actually captured in the minutes. I did last year as well appear before the ad hoc committee, whereby I testified and was able to provide the minutes that supported the manner in which I was able to stand up to those decisions. So I think that is the reason why I was removed in summary, is that because I dissented and I did not go with the majority view, despite very difficult circumstances. I held my ground, and I think through the recommendations of the ad hoc committee, that proved to be the right route. In terms of when matters really went wrong, as a professional board member, I raised my views. I made sure that they were understood by the majority of board members. Unfortunately, I think that the board, certain component of the board, really had vested interest and bulldozed decisions through by virtue of their majority at that point in time. So it is very difficult to remedy the situation because of that approach, that very sort of hostile, abrasive approach within the board. All we could do was be dissenting board members and make sure that is correctly minuted. In terms of remedial actions, the best thing that I could do at that point in time was to be a dissenting board member, as is allowed for in the corporate governance codes of conduct. In terms of alerting stakeholders, we did, as individual board members, raise issues to the portfolio committee chair at that point in time. I think Honorable Gavin Davis was a member, when we had difficulties as well. He may be aware of some of the situations. We raised them with the Auditor General, with National Treasury, with those governance components. In terms of the broader public, there was a number of leaks to the media. The more specific one was when Mr. Mutsueneng was actually appointed as the permanent COO. I think if honourable members remember, there was newspaper articles with those board members who voted for and those who were against.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am.
Yes.
Thanks. Honourable Fanda. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rachel, and for making yourself available for the SABC board. If you could do things differently, I think you've had now the advantage of hindsight. If you would do things differently, what would you have done different when you were a board member of the SABC and were all these decisions, illegal decisions being made?
I think given hindsight and the way in which the situation has deteriorated up to now, I think I was quite good in keeping an audit trail, but going back, I would want to keep a more detailed audit trail. I think I kept detailed audit trails of minutes, but for example, emails whereby issues were elevated to the portfolio committee chair, which sometimes were not always, supported by the entire portfolio committee at the time. I think there could have been an opportunity for us to have maybe even escalated it beyond the portfolio committee at the time to possibly the deputy president, to the National Assembly, and those stakeholders as well.
Do you feel you spoke out enough, given all the things that were happening? Do you feel you should have been louder and making the public aware of what was happening at the SABC board?
I think at the time I tried to conduct myself within the corporate governance frameworks and respect protocol, but unfortunately I think the situation at the end of the day collapsed to such an extent whereby it became in public interest. And only after sort of the leak into the media and when I was contacted, for comments, then I really commented. But I suppose there could be an opportunity to comment earlier. It's just that also you've got to manage the situation of not leaking board information and not leaking confidential decisions. So I think it was that balance that I was trying to strive.
If those decisions and those the things that are being done are illegal, do you not feel that you have a responsibility to make the authorities know of what's happening?
Yes, the authorities in terms of the portfolio committee, for sure. The Auditor General, Treasury, those authorities, for sure, definitely.
But if we put you back on the board now, will you kind of do the same thing? Will you stick to the rules, or will you speak out more loudly when you see things happening that shouldn't be happening, or will you do the same thing?
I think given the crisis that we currently face, as well as the public interest, I think I definitely will have an opportunity to speak out more.
Thank you, Honourable Ndoze.
Thank you. So the thing I'm not sure about you is your grasp of the policy perspectives in relation to the SABC. So I'm going to tease you on those things. What is your view? For an example, a lot of people say that we should be more Pan-African in the ways in which we tell our stories in the SABC. The content that is in the SABC should be more and more Pan-African. Entertainment, all the productions, including news coverage. What's your view on that?
Thank you, Member. I fully agree, but I think that it needs to be done once we transition to the DTT platform. I think currently, because we have such limited, space availability, it's very difficult to do. I think if one looks at the Broadcasting Act, there's a component of the commercial as well as the public service mandates. I think the Pan-African perspective will really be in the interest of the commercial aspects. For example, we could have a 24-hour channel that focuses on the African diaspora. If you look at South Africa, particularly, we have a number of foreign migrants that are living here. And I think those are huge audience numbers that are not specifically catered for. So I think if we are able to provide content in their languages as well, over and above our 11 official languages, it can definitely be another revenue stream for the SABC.
Okay, so we must wait for DTT to give, to tell our own stories. I don't understand that. How is DTT going to give us more platform to tell our own stories, which we don't have now?
I think we can start building the content now. I mean, in terms of dedicated channels specifically.
Are you saying there's no content, there's no Pan-African content?
I think there is that the SABC can start with enhancing that, definitely, and maybe introducing it in a very systematic manner.
Yeah, explain that systematic manner, because, okay, so the direct question here is, the feeling is when you watch South African TV, it's like you're in Europe or you're in America. There is no Pan-African content in it. That's why there was a move for 90% rule, which apparently it's blamed for losing money. What is this systematic way in which you would introduce Pan-African content? Explain to me.
For example, I think there would be areas of public interest. For example, recently, the Rwandan elections. I think there was quite a number of South Africans that I noticed were very interested to follow the Rwandan elections and of interest in terms of their developmental mandates and how their economy is transitioning. So I think we can cover that through the 24-hour news, to the 24-hour news station, as well as...
We already have a 24-hour news station.
Yes, but more, as you say, more African content as opposed to South African content.
Okay, what's the funding model, in your view, that the SABC should adopt to improve its money or revenue? Okay,
I think, for me specifically, I would like to see an overhaul of the licensing system. I think currently the TV license system it's a flat rate, it's very simplistic. If you look at the rates that are levied, there's a uniform rate for dealers, businesses, as well as domestic use. I think that is not really, congruent to the socio-economic situation of the country. For example, you would find that you would have a dealer such as Macro who sells TVs and makes a profit out of that, paying your same annual TV license as a business, for example, a 5-star hotel, which is charging perhaps 4,000 a night, which is then having to pay the same TV license that you would have, a domestic resident having to pay in Langa, for example. I think there should be a tiered system. I would like to propose that we align the license fees in terms of those categories. But if you look at the domestic TV license, I'd also break that up into categories of your rural, urban, and peri-urban, so that you don't have a house.
But majority of hotels will just migrate to DSTV, which they do now. They'll just leave and just do DSTV.
In terms of the Broadcasting Act, if you have a TV set, you're required to pay a TV license currently. Yeah.
So the last one is in relation to Editorial Independence. My mic is not.
Oh, sorry.
Last question.
1 second left.
Yeah. Second. My last question is in relation to editorial independence. What went wrong in relation to editorial independence in the era in which you were a board member?
Thank you, member. From my understanding of the situation, I think we had a problem at that point in time whereby there was too much power vested in certain positions. For example, the COO position at that particular time, which then, assumed positions that would have been the responsibility of the head of news. That actually restricted the independence of journalists. There was interference in the newsroom through that executive in particular, which is a specific reason why I did not support that appointment. I think it vested with certain individuals as opposed to a policy that was applied. It was by virtue of wrong leadership at executive level, supported by a large component of the board at that time.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Honorable Dose and Ms. Kalidass. Honorable Machoba, it's now your turn, ma'am.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Rachel. Welcome to the committee. As far as I know, the SABC have a vision and a mission. Can you convince this committee what is the most vision related to the youth programs?
Thank you, Honourable Member. I think in terms of the vision as is documented in the Broadcasting Act, is to educate, inform, and entertain. So I think the content that's provided is in relation to audiences. The Broadcasting Act allows for specific programming to target audiences of your youth, your women, etc. In terms of your youth, there would be programs and content provided that would be of interest to them.
To those vision and missions, there is an era that is not inspire the nation to those vision of SABC.
Absolutely. I think that the SABC has failed to evolve in recent years. If you look at the youth as well, they are very techno-savvy, they keep up to date with trends, and the SABC has not completely evolved to keep up with that. So I think that is where we have lost the specific youth audience. And to be able to ensure that they return to the SABC, we need to provide quality content that would be of interest and compelling to them.
Do you think SABC must make any changing to the mission and visions? Is there any changes that's supposed to be changed in SABC?
I don't think that they specifically need to change the vision and mission. I think as is captured in the Broadcasting Act, as well as the regulations are sufficient. The challenge has been previously that it was not fully complied with and implemented.
You want specific, any changing, do you want any changing in SABC personally?
Yes, I think personally there's definitely a need to change the organization completely. I think in recent years there's been a culture of lawlessness. I think that is definitely the first area that needs to change. We need to be able to take the SABC back to being a law-abiding citizen in terms of compliance with the Broadcasting Act, with the ICASA regulations, the Public Protector Act, as well as the various reports of the Auditor General. I think if you start there, by compliance and adherence to those laws and regulations, a lot will be able to fall into place and correct itself.
You will select it as a best candidate. You will implement your personal programs in SABC. That's what you said. Are you going to change your personal interest in SABC if you are selected as a candidate?
You mean in terms of content, when you say personal interest?
Thank you very much. The time is up. Honorable Dolas.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chairperson. Good morning, Ms. Kalidass. Ma'am, if you can understand, at some point you served in the SABC board, but with time you were dropped. Can I hear from you whether you are saying there's no recourse as we are embarking in the exercise of interviewing in preparation for the appointment of the board? Are you suggesting that there is no due course? The board members can be dropped anytime, by anybody? What can you tell us about that? Secondly, I realize that in your CV you are quite an activist insofar as the role is concerned. You have served in many boards and so on. Can you talk more as a South African, understanding our background, the 90-10, whether there was such a policy? If yes, what implication did it have? If no, still the question stands, what implication did it have insofar as the SABC is concerned? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. In terms of the first question, I think there needs to be recourse for board members in terms of the decisions they make. They need to be held accountable in terms of the Broadcasting Act as well as corporate governance. It's unfortunate at the time of our unlawful removal that there was no recourse for those particular board members that unlawfully removed us. There was a legal opinion tabled before the Portfolio Committee as well as Parliament at the time, which specifically indicates that the Broadcasting Act superseded the Companies Act, but that was not really supported, by the Portfolio Committee at that time. I think, however, the situation has corrected itself subsequently with the recommendations of the ad hoc committee, which has reconfirmed the precedents taken by the Broadcasting Act. If I look at the proclamation for the SIU, one of the areas of scope of work is to be able to look at the unlawful decisions made by board members previously. So I think that will allow for recourse to be taken against board members who acted unlawfully previously.
I'll give you your minutes, Honorable Dalash, but there is a request that we speak closer to the mic. Remember, this is broadcasted live, so if you can, as much as possible, be audible. Honorable Dalash, is still your time?
No, thank you, Chair. As a follow-up question from what Ms. Kalidass is saying, is she suggesting that then the then board, took an unlawful decision? This is the conclusion I would want to hear from her as a person. I understand the processes that were followed by the Parliament. And if she's appointed as a member of the board by the committee, what contribution will she make in making sure that what happened earlier on doesn't happen again?
Thank you, Honourable Member. In terms of the latter part of the question, ensuring that what happened does not happen again, I think it goes back to the quality and the credibility of the board members that are appointed. Even though we may not all come from similar backgrounds, and hold the same values, I think it's important to be able to engage each other constructively in the board, but when that fails, to be able to escalate it to the next level. If I look at the previous board members, we all appointed through the Portfolio Committee on Communications, and we were led by the first chair who lied about qualifications. We had the second chair which did not respect the legislation. So it is very difficult conditions at that point in time. So I think, when we realize that there's board members that we can't work with, to be able to report their performance to the Portfolio Committee as well as the National Assembly. In terms of your second question around the 90-10, if I could move to that, I completely disagree with that approach. I think that the 90-10 policy was uninformed. It was not in the best interest of the organization. It eroded the audience base, it eroded your subscription as well as your advertising revenue. It was detrimental to the financial sustainability of the organization. The ICASA regulations prescribes criteria for your local content. I think we should have complied with that and had a sustainable approach in which we enhance and improve on our local content.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kalidass. Honorable Zede.
Ms. Kalidass, surely it's not everything bad that is happening in the SABC. If you were to lead a delegation of the SABC as part of the outreach programs to talk about some of the good things that are happening, what would you say? Can you raise the morale of a South African who has lost hope about the SABC?
Thank you, Honourable Member. I think one of the requirements of the Broadcasting Act in terms of the public service mandate is to build social cohesion and nation building. So I think there definitely is content that can be produced to be able to enhance that objective. For example, the competitive advantage of the SABC is its ability to produce content in all official 11 languages. So I think we need to be able to use that to our advantage, to be able to be more accessible across the country. In terms of our outreach, I think we need to be more engaging. The SABC has in recent years not really listened to the public in its entirety. I think we need to be able to understand what the audience wants, use market intelligence as well as communication.
Just hang on a bit. Just switch it off. I'm saying, despite all these things that we're talking about, the SABC, which are not good, surely there are some other positive things happening or have happened in the SABC. So I'm saying, can you just raise the morale of a South African who says the SABC, everything bad is happening in the SABC?
Thank you. I think to raise the morale, one really has to start from the inside. I think there's very good quality staff that has come through with the SABC 8. I think there's quality journalists, and those need to be acknowledged and to be given the correct platforms within the organization. And I think if they support it and given the right, given the right levels within the organization, it will result in quality content and news that will boost the morale in the organization, and if it's boosted in the organization, it will translate to the morale being boosted across the country.
What's your view about this debate going on the need for the review of the powers and the role of the executive directors of the board? What's your take on that?
I fully agree that there should be a review. In my personal opinion, I found that it created quite a bit of difficulty in that the Broadcasting Act in one instance says that the executives are accountable to the board. But in another paragraph, they are members of the board in terms of your 12 plus 3 making your 15 members. So you have issues arising in the board practically whereby the executives would submit, for example, a policy or documents to the board for approval that they compiled and would have passed through the executive committee meeting, but then at the board, they are also voting in support of their own documents and policies. So it distorts the voting at board level.
Digital migration, what does it mean to the SABC?
I think digital migration is an exciting new opportunity for us to be able to reinvent the SABC as well as to be able to evolve to meet our competitors. There are a number of requirements that need to be fulfilled, which I believe processes are in motion with the Department of Communications. For example, the 2 channels that are on your DSTV platform of the 24-hour news and Encore, those would then revert back to the SABC once we complete the digital migration. There's also the opportunity for us to be able to include new channels as well.
The current status of the relationship, state of affairs in terms of the relationship between the SABC and the regulator, if you were to be appointed a board member again, what is it that will do to improve on that kind of on that state of affairs in terms of how the two entities relate to each other?
My understanding is that the relationship has deteriorated due to non-compliance by the SABC. I think if the SABC has to comply with the ICASA regulations and rulings, that would restore the relationship as well as credibility of the broadcaster with ICASA. It deteriorated to such a level of criminal charges being levied against the SABC. I think we should never ever repeat that situation. We need to strengthen and enforce our compliance unit within the SABC such that we have early detection and prevention mechanisms.
No, thanks.
Honorable Kungubele.
Thanks, Honorable Chair. Good morning, Mr. Kalidass. Under the board charter, they speak about a board giving a strategic direction to the SABC. Normally, when you're in your management school, you would have spoken about strategic, tactical, operational. But they choose to speak about strategic direction. What would be your view about that in as far as you think the primary role of the board is supposed to be in SABC?
Thank you. In terms of the Broadcasting Act, the board is charged with the responsibility to lead the organization. So strategy definitely is your core component of that. I think the board is a non-executive board, so that's why it's very important that that role is fulfilled through strategy as well as your oversight in ensuring that that strategy that you set out is complied with on a regular basis.
Could you list what could be one or two strategic tasks the board would be seized with?
I think the immediate task to be able to return the SABC to its former glory is to be able to bring back the audiences. So I think our primary strategy should focus around how that can be achieved in terms of maintaining stability of our audiences and increasing audience numbers. That would in turn be able to attract further advertisers. So I think our strategy should be around revenue generation and enhancement, as well as in terms of your audience, the quality of your content, as well as improving the SABC's reputation.
What would be your comment about the significance of the concept fiduciary in as far as responsibility obligations of leading institutions is concerned?
Your fiduciary responsibilities, it's a relationship of trust, care, and skill with the organization. So I think that's why it's very important when board members carry out their fiduciary responsibilities, it's always in the best interest of the corporation. It's a relationship of trust whereby you're entrusted, through the legislation with the governance and the assets, the resources of the organizations. So one has to be able to make best decisions carrying out that trust, care, and skill.
In the preamble of the SABC Act, which you'll agree with me that the bigger body of the Act is decoding that preamble in sections and clauses. They speak about South African expression, acknowledging the development of the South African expression. Is there a difference between that and Pan-Africanism? Is there a difference between that and Pan-African expression?
In my opinion, yes. I think, first and foremost, I think the South African identity is in relation to our 11 official languages, as well as the culture, religious values of the South African population. And then Pan-African would be in terms of the other African countries, as well as citizens which are residing within the country, being able to cater for their needs as well.
A South African expression is not Pan-African expression. necessarily?
Not necessarily. I think different communities, would have different needs and wants and expressions. So I think you can't really generalize, but I think there would be areas of overlap and similarity.
Last question is, in the board's charter, there's a series under the role of the board section about the governance imperative which the board is supposed to be seized with. Can you list 2 or 3? Governance imperatives under the section role of the.
In terms of the role of the board, I think, one of the functions is to ensure that there is no conflict of interest in terms of the non-executive members conducting their roles and responsibilities. So I think independence is a core factor of the non-executive board members in terms of the manner in which they make decisions. I think that's very important. They are responsible, for example, the financial affairs of the corporation. So that would be to safeguard assets, to be able to manage the financial sustainability of the organization, to be able to ensure that the organization complies with audit requirements. There's a requirement in terms of the Act that you keep separate accounting records of your public service as well as your commercial mandates, so to be able to ensure that that is fulfilled in the organization.
Thank you very much. Honorable Davis.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ms. Kalidass, for making yourself available. You had a very difficult time during your previous tenure on the board, being removed unlawfully and being accused of fraudulent conduct. So we commend you for coming forward to be reappointed because we know that it does carry some significant reputational risks. You mentioned Claudi Motsoeneng and the power that he wielded over the board when he was the COO. But it's not just about the personality of Claudi Motsoeneng. We've seen this problem time and time again, where executive directors wield excessive power over the board members. And essentially you have executive directors dictating to the board what they should do instead of the other way around. Now, you mentioned the potential of revoking the voting rights of executive directors. What other concrete steps would you propose to change the power dynamic on the board so that the directors report to the board and not the other way around?
To commence with, I think it's very important for the MOI to be revised. During my tenure, the MOI was incorrectly revised to be able to take powers that are vested with the board into the executive. So I think that needs to be undone. It also came out through the ad hoc committee, whereby there were various versions of the MOI. One really needs to understand what is the one that's in place, and to be able to correct that, to be able to also review the delegations of authority framework, such that you are able to, commence by giving the executives only the power that is necessary until such time as you can prove yourself, stabilize the organization, and then devolve more power into the executives. I think it's also very important that power does not reside with specific individuals, but for example, like your committees, for example, your executive committee as a collective, as opposed to a specific executive, as a COO or a CFO. I think it's also very important in terms of the manner in which that they are appointed, that the board takes full responsibility for the appointment of all executives. Previously as well, through the MOI, it was incorrectly revised, whereby executives were then appointed by your 3 GCs without the involvement of the board. The board was only notified, so it's very difficult to hold them accountable.
Thank you. The SABC, as you know, is in the midst of a financial crisis requiring a multi-billion rand bailout. Now, as a former board member and a chartered accountant, you should be very familiar with the SABC's finances. What concrete steps would you take to increase revenue and to contain costs without compromising on the SABC's public service mandate?
Thank you. I mentioned, earlier license fees. I think one of the challenges around license fees is the collection. For example, if I look at the prior year, it's about 1.9 billion that is recognized, but then about R1 billion that is then derecognized. So I think that's a substantial amount. And the reason for that is because of the database as well as the collectability. You would have license fees paid when a TV is bought, but subsequently, the audience would not keep up with those license fees. You have postal addresses that are sometimes incorrect. You don't have that follow through in terms of being able to enforce collection. So I think I would start off by reviewing the credibility of the database, to review the model to ensure that it's more sustainable in the long term. In terms of advertising revenue, just at a quick glance, I found that the rate cards of the SABC versus the competitors, I think are quite outdated. I would make sure that we have the latest audience numbers. We offer incentives to advertisers specifically to draw them back into the SABC. Even though we have our challenges, we still have the largest audience share in the country. So I think it's very important to be able to make those packages attractive to advertisers as well as to sponsors. In terms of cost curtailment, I'll look at the key drivers. One of your key cost drivers is your sports rights. I think there's an opportunity to be able to renegotiate some of those contracts so that it's more sustainable for the organization. Your other large cost driver is your payroll costs. You've had unjustifiable increases over the years. You've had people in incorrect positions. I think your entire payroll needs to be reviewed. It's currently not sustainable to keep up with that significant ballooning payroll cost. There's other significant cost drivers as well that I would review. For example, your agreements with producers. I think there's an opportunity to be able to revise that to make sure that it's value for money.
Thank you.
One more question, Joe. Do I have time for one more question?
Your time is up, but you can.
Thank you. You mentioned a culture of lawlessness at the SABC. Now, when you were on the SABC board, did you ever come across evidence of fraud and corruption? And if so, did you report it to the police as you are obliged to do in terms of the Prevention and Combating of Corrupt Activities Act? Thanks.
Not specifically ones that I would have picked up. There's mechanisms, for example, you have your internal audit unit within the organization, as well as there was a forensics unit. So through their reporting, they would be able to, investigate, report, and hand over to law enforcement agencies. As the audit committee and board, we had oversight over that process. There was also the corruption that emanated out of the public protector report that we had oversight of, but not me specifically receiving anything via whistleblower.
Thank you. Honorable Doza.
No.
1 minute.
Yes, one. You see, they asked you about one of the positive things coming out of the SABC in relation to boosting the morale of the public. What do you think about Jovijo?
Sorry, about?
Jovijo.
I must apologize, I don't know what that was.
Oh, Jovijo is a program. Or do you watch SABC 1? 2?
I'm more inclined towards SABC 3.
You don't know Jovijo? Okay.
No, thank you very much. Honorable Kalago.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Rachel. How are you?
And yourself.
Fine. Rachel, I see here currently you are serving on 2 boards, and you know how demanding and what we're trying to fix in the SABC. How will you juggle your time with these other, because we are having 2 important responsibilities on this board?
Thank you. The one board term ended at the end of July, so I currently have only 1 active board membership. That board membership is in a very stable organization. The board meetings are approximately 6 a year, so it's not very demanding.
Coming back to that question of local content, in your view, do you agree or disagree that SABC should pursue local content being dominant? if you agree, how must it pursue that, taking into consideration the costs and the lack of money to develop local producers for content?
Thank you. I think local content is very important. If you look at the Broadcasting Act, there's a specific need to be able to ensure that content is accessible to all South Africans in all 11 languages, and I think that is very much local. I think local content needs to be introduced in a more sustainable manner as opposed to what was done with 9010. For example, we have production studios at the SABC. Where possible, one can drive down the cost of production by allowing those producers to use our facilities, to be able to, I think, negotiate contracts that would attract your audience numbers. That in turn would be able to generate advertising revenue, so it would be self-funded to an extent.
Thank you. You alluded earlier here on the turmoil, which everybody knows in South Africa, which was happening in the SABC. And when you were asked what actions did you take, do you raise it publicly? Do you raise it with any, or reported some of the things to court? If I heard you correctly, you said you did raise it to one of the people in the committee, Mr. Davis. If you'll correct me.
Just to correct you, it was raised to the chair of the portfolio committee at that time, who was Ms. Joyce Molloy Maropa. I think Mr. Davis is just the only familiar face that I recognize who was a part of that committee at that time, who would be aware possibly of the situation. But it was directed to the chair of the portfolio committee.
You wrote it to the chair? Oh, okay.
Meetings with the chair of the portfolio committee, whereby I was able to give context to the challenges that was happening.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. We won't break for tea now. We'll call the next, and then we'll break after that. We deal with one more. Time is against us. Thank you very much, Ms. Kalidass. Do we have any questions to members?
None, Chair, thank you.
Thank you very much. Go well. Hope to see you again. Thanks. The next candidate, please.